Welcome back to the Gaming News Canada show presented by GBG Plc. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. Well, unless you were stranded on the deserted island last week or were 100% consumed with tariff tiffs, you know that the Four Nations Face-Off was a huge hit with North American hockey fans. Here in the True North Strong and Free, 10.7 million viewers watched Canada's overtime victory over Team USA in the championship game of the four-team tournament on Sportsnet. And south of the border, the championship tilt drew 9.3 million viewers on ESPN, the worldwide leader's most watched hockey game ever. Rob Corte, Rogers Vice President of Sportsnet and NHL Production, will be with us on this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by GBG Plc to speak about the afterglow of the Four Nations Face-Off, the possibility of there being 5 to 6 Canadian clubs in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and more. Later, professional sport leagues have been among the stakeholders facing flack from opponents of the growing online sports betting industry in both Canada and the US. As we've seen and heard over the past 4 years of covering the industry, the NHL, NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, and others have seen not only revenue from partnership deals with sports wagering operators, but evidence that betting helps drive engagement with game broadcasts. And the growing popularity of in-game betting has also provided the league with another platform to promote their teams and athletes. We will be joined by John Ewing, the PR Manager Insights for BetMGM, and DraftKings veteran lead trader Johnny Avello to dig a little bit deeper into that. I can't believe I'm saying this, but for the first time, we welcome to the Gaming News Canada show the Vice President of Sportsnet and NHL Production at Rogers, Rob Corte. Hey, Rob, we've known each other a long time, and I'm surprised it has taken me this long to get you on the podcast.
Yeah, I know. I was wondering that as well, but finally I'm here, and I'm very happy to take part. So thanks for having me, Steve.
Hey, Rob, why don't we just start with you and I are both diehard hockey fans. You have a son playing Tier 2 hockey in Stouffville right now. I'm spending my evenings supervising referees and junior senior hockey playoffs up here in Kincardine these days. But the Four Nations Face-Off, I think probably you'd have to go back in terms of pro hockey 10 years to the Sochi Olympics to have a hockey tournament that meant so much to sports fans across this country.
Yeah, you know what? People are using that term often, the perfect storm, and it just seemed like everything just worked. There was a desire not only from the fans but the players to have best on best, and you've heard quite a bit of that over the last few years. And then when you got there, the hockey was incredible. I got to witness it firsthand, and it was elite. Like, it was at a different level than what you even see regularly in the NHL. And then, of course, you had what happened on the Saturday night between the United States and Canada and the 3 fights in 9 seconds. And that got everybody going. Add in a little bit of the politics that are behind the scenes going on between the US and Canada. And it just took off. And, I was there from the start to the end of the event. I traveled with the whole event. And you could just feel it build and build and build and grow. And not only, usually events like that, Canada will kind of always be there. Canadian fans are into it. But to see the fans in the United States really pick it up, get into it, get behind it, and the U.S. networks who we were working side by side with, they knew they were onto something special. And when Saturday night's U.S. Number came in, I think it was 4.4 million for the U.S.-Canada, the first game, you could just see the U.S. networks go, wow, this is huge. And everybody just kept ramping it up, and it just kind of worked perfectly and culminated in an incredible final with an overtime winner.
Hey, Rob, do you think it was the 3 fights in the first 9 seconds of the Canada-US game that where the tournament really took off and became something that, one of those sporting events that everybody talks about, even if you're not a hockey fan?
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of anticipation. Everybody looked at Saturday night in Montreal, U.S. versus Canada, kind of as the marquee matchup in the round robin. So there was anticipation there. Nobody expected what the fireworks that happened right off the top. And I think, at the end of the day, with the United States winning that game, I think it was good for both sides. For Canada, you kind of we weren't necessarily the heavy favorite, somewhat of the underdog. And it was, that Canadian story, face adversity, and then take it and win it in the final. And then the United States is like, we've beaten Canada. We beat them in Montreal on a Saturday night. Confidence was high. Confidence was high with United States hockey fans. So I think all that stuff worked perfectly, but definitely those fights really kind of lit the fuse and kind of blew it up.
Hey, Rob, just in your position, and again, like, I think all of us know the feeling that players have before big games like that, and the coaches, and obviously the officials. But I'm sure the broadcasters and executives like yourself, you feel the same kind of excitement and nervousness, because if you're a producer, you don't want to miss that highlight or that expression on a player's face, or in the case of McDavid goal, there's some great footage of John Cooper on the bench celebrating with the coaching staff. And, I give you a chance just to say a few words about the work that your people did around this tournament.
Well, many of us were saying after the event that it was one of our career highlights. And I agree with that. And this was a really big project. Like Sportsnet, we produced the host feed, which was the line cut of the game. So every network, essentially, we had the foundation. So it was the cut of the game and all the replays. So a group of Sportsnet staff put that together. And then each network took that and then build their domestic show, where they would add in commentators, music, graphics, and tell their stories that way. So we had two crews going, which was big, right? And getting into the event in our conversations with the other networks and the NHL, we wanted to make this look big. We wanted this to have an Olympic style feel. So you probably noticed we had some different cameras. We had the super camera, which was a kind of like a cable camera. We had a referee camera on his chest,
right,
something called Mindfly. We were allowed for the first time in the NHL to actually have a skate camera go on the ice after a goal or on face-offs. Usually we can be on for starting goalies and anthems, but not actually when plays happening and players are really moving on the ice. So those were some wins for us. And so everybody kind of knew this was going to have to be a heightened production. And it was, you could just see in the group the focus. They knew this, they were part of something special and something different. And I think everybody delivered. And at the end of the day, everybody was very pleased, but everybody was proud because they know how hard they worked. And Steve, like this, there were some really tough times in this event. And by tough times, obviously just it's not, crucial times or really hardships. But if you looked at Saturday, we did a double header, and then the technicians were finishing past 1 o'clock in the morning, and we were on a bus at 5:30 in the morning, taking a 7 a.m. charter out, fingers crossed that we were actually going to get out, because there was a huge snowstorm in Montreal. And it was really tentative whether or not we were even going to get out. And so some of our people left early to start setting up in Boston. But the rest of us, there was about 75 of us on this charter, and there was kind of like a scene from a movie. 6 a.m, we're walking across a tarmac, and it's windy and there's snow blowing, and we're not even sure if the plane's going to take off. And we all get on the plane and they de-ice, and then we finally take off, and we're like, we're going to make it. So we got to Boston at 8 a.m, and then most of the technicians went straight to the truck, and it was, they were working until 8, 9 o'clock at night after, a short, very little sleep and a tight travel day, only to do another doubleheader on Monday. So going into that event, we all looked at that stretch of 3 days as something was going to be very difficult and, could be in peril if the weather was bad. And fortunately we got out and made it happen, but it was pretty stressful.
I'm glad you brought that up, because after that, the Finland, I think the Finland-Sweden game on the Saturday, I was thinking about Chris Cuthbert and Mr. Craig Simpson, and just, calling 2 games in one day that's a tall order. But you're absolutely right. All those people in the background, the cameraman, the producers, and the directors, and the panels. That's a long day in a pretty, in our business, in a pretty high stress situation.
Absolutely. It was, in the end, it worked out well, but I can tell you there was a few sweaty palms, especially as we were watching the forecasts on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and trying our best to make sure everybody got out. And I know like the league changed their charter. The teams were kind of changing their charter because, there's a certain time you can't leave an airport. So they were trying to get out before that, and then trying to beat the storm. It's kind of hour by hour when the snow was really going to get heavy. And the thing is, when we got into Boston, it was raining hard all day, and there was a lot of sleet and slush. It was an ugly day. We're one of those bone-chilling cold type days, and everybody, still had to work. And the building in Boston, the trucks are parked outside, so you have to do a lot of work outside, go outside, inside all day. Where at least in Montreal, you're parked inside the building. Once you're in, you take your jacket off. It's kind of climate controlled, but Boston didn't offer us that luxury.
You mentioned the perfect storm, and I think part of that too for a lot of us living across the country. It's been a really difficult winter, and up here where I live in Bruce County, we haven't seen this much snow in 40 years. So I think this tournament came along at a perfect time too, where it didn't matter how much it snowed. We were quite happy to be in the house watching the best hockey players in the world go at each other.
Well, it felt like hockey, right? The weather felt like hockey. I will tell you this, though. There was a little bit of stress for everybody who left their families at home, because we were getting all the reports of all the snow that was coming, and our spouses are telling us, I had to shovel 3 times today, right? So, yeah, you took a little bit of heat. But anyway, part of the gig.
Hey, Rob, you mentioned some of the elements, like the camera coming on the ice after goals net. Are there a few of those things that you would like to use in the Stanley Cup playoffs now that you've had a chance to experiment with it?
Absolutely. But, a lot of that stuff is at league discretion. So there was a lot of discussions, and there were, the league puts in some rules, things that we can and cannot do in and around where we can shoot, audio, things like that. So this was important for us and the other networks to get a proof of concept and do a test at the highest level. And it worked. The league was pleased with what we did. So we're going to continue to pursue opportunities now. And, we've gained a little bit of credit that we were able to do this, and it worked well. So we're going to try and push it forward. But everything is always on a case-by-case basis.
Hey, Rob, I think this is year 10 of the 12-year deal for Sportsnet
11.
having 11. Sorry, that's right. Next season is the last year. And, you look at the standings as we talked this afternoon, and it's I think 5 or 6 of the Canadian clubs are in the postseason mix right now. Montreal probably is the odd team out right now, but you as a senior executive, are you checking out the standings every day and rubbing your rosary beads and hoping that we're gonna have 6 clubs in the playoffs?
Well, I'm not at the point yet of checking it every day, but every second day, right? And after trade deadline, which is next Friday, then we check it every day. But no, obviously having Canadian teams in the playoffs is huge for us on so many fronts, right? Ratings wise, even when 2 Canadian teams meet in the playoffs, for us, the good news is one is moving forward, right? So we guarantee that at least another team is going to move forward, which is important. And then, of course, the more production we can do within Canada is beneficial, right? It keeps Canadians working. And quite frankly, the way the US dollar is right now, the more production we can do in Canada is advantageous for us budget wise. So, yeah, we're looking very closely. And this has been a long deal. And we all go back to the second year of the deal where no Canadian teams made the playoffs, right? That was a challenging time. Unfortunately, the Canadian clubs have really picked it up towards the end of the deal. And, with Edmonton making the final last year, and Toronto's always a threat, Winnipeg's the top team in the league, Ottawa's getting better, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, it's an exciting time. So fingers crossed that we're going to have a lot of Canadian teams in, but it just makes for a better playoffs, no question.
Yeah, and I think even if take aside the rights and what we just talked about, I mean, having an Edmonton Toronto Stanley Cup final with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and Austin Matthews, I mean, that would be pretty special, regardless of the skin in the game that any of us might have.
Yeah, we had a sneak peek a couple weeks ago on Hockey Night in Canada before the Four Nations, where Toronto was in Edmonton, and the atmosphere was electric. It was a great game, and it was fast, right? And you really see the skill level and the pace of play pick up when you got those elite players, much like we saw in Four Nations. So yeah, a Canadian final would be fantastic, whoever's part of it. But certainly, if you had the star power of McDavid versus Matthews, that certainly would be exceptional.
Hey, Rob, before I let you go, I did want to ask you, we obviously this podcast, we deal a lot with what's going on in the sports betting and iGaming industry. And we talk often about the Ontario market that's going to be 3 years old in April, and a lot of the conversations around advertising and sportsbooks working with Sportsnet and TSN and other networks to try to find a happy medium with integrating sports betting content into broadcast without offending people who don't bet. And I think I mentioned to you when we were trying to tee up this interview that I think the Sports Interaction partnership with Hockey Night in Canada has been a good one. Just how has that strategy shifted over the 3 years since the Ontario market opened?
Yeah, it's been a lot of trial and error, I think, and you had a few constituents who are heavily involved in this. first of all, the sponsor, right? The betting companies, they have certain things that they want, and early on they were trying to attract as many potential subscribers and customers to their service. We have ourselves who are interested in obviously keeping the sponsors happy, but there's an editorial portion of what we do. And of course, most importantly, is the viewer and the consumers, right? You want to make sure you're providing them with compelling content that's not going to push them away. And it's hard, right? Because bettors are very in tune with everything that's going around sporting events, and the casual viewer might not. So trying to find what the right balance is. And I think early on, we kind of tended to go a little bit heavier on betting lingo and maybe a little more inside the game. And the feedback was that, and from all of us, that maybe that wasn't really the right approach. And like you said, with Sports Interaction and Hockey Night in Canada now, we're kind of still telling the editorial stories that we want, but then we tie in whether it's a graphic about the individual we're talking about. And then we tie in the betting odds. Say if we're doing a pack on Mitch Marner, we'll have a Mitch Marner graphic with the odds for that night on something that Mitch Marner might do. And then to kind of bookend it, Ron, as the host, he'll give kind of the odds on who the favorites are, and then he'll give a parlay as well. So we don't ask our commentators to give their opinions on who they should bet on or wager, any of that stuff. They're essentially saying, here's the odds, right? Here are the numbers. You guys go and decide what you want. And that way it's an option and it's not too over the top. And I think, it's taken, like you said, 3 years for this to kind of move on. And I think we're in a spot now where we've kind of found the right approach, and we kind of take that approach with all our sports, not just hockey.
Yeah, we should mention as well. I mean, Sportsnet, it's not just a television network. I mean, you've got radio programs, you've got podcasts, you have the website. So there's certainly a lot of assets available for not just sportsbook operators, but any brand to advertise on. Correct?
Absolutely, and it's hard because even before betting was legal, the individuals who were betting, they had their sources, right, and they knew where to go. And it's hard for anybody new to come in, even an established sports network like ourselves or TSN, to come in and say, "Oh, we're the experts in betting now." The individuals who are betting, they've already been doing it for a while, and they have their go-tos. They have their places that provide them comfort and trusted information from their perspective. It was a really hard nut to crack, no question.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we should mention too is that the leagues, you're right, the leagues have a say in how those ads are presented and the content that's presented as well. So it's not just this isn't just a partnership between Sportsnet and the sports books. The leagues are involved as well,
and our partner clubs too.
Right.
They have their own individual deals because we have deals with regional teams, and they have their own deals as well that we have to respect. So yeah, it is a pretty heavily regulated business right now, and we do our best, and we're really focused on making sure we're being responsible and we're following the guidelines.
Hey Rob, last question. And speaking of responsible, again, we cover a lot of real estate on this podcast and in the newsletter about responsible gambling. We saw, I think it was last month, that ESPN announced they were going to start doing public service announcements on gambling responsibly using some of their talent. I just wonder, is that something that's been discussed within the walls of Sportsnet?
Well, we look at everything, and like kind of as I said earlier, we try and separate as much as we can our individual commentators from betting, like providing information, but not necessarily giving direct focus or encouraging people to go this way or this way with the bets. And we've got responsible gaming PSAs that we work with on like I said, all the government guidelines, what leagues and teams are doing. So we're looking at all the right ways to get the messages out. We haven't done it yet with our commentators, but we'll look at that. But right now there isn't any plan to do that.
Yeah, and I think we've seen with the rules and regulations that changed around advertising that the Alcohol and Gaming Commission Ontario put into place pretty much, I guess, a year ago now, Rob, that we are seeing a bit more of a focus on responsible gambling. We've seen the Connor McDavid ads on BetMGM, and I think there are operators that have been, for the most part, pretty responsible with advertising and promoting that responsible gambling. So I'm not sure it's up to the networks to do that, but I think, as you mentioned, it is I think incumbent on the networks to at least make sure that box is being ticked in the operators with their advertising and the promotions that they do on your network.
For sure. And look, we understand the the challenges around gambling, and we want to be part of the solution as well. So anything we can do to help, we will, and we're always open and willing to make any changes or do anything that can help the situation.
Rob Corte is the Vice President of Sportsnet and NHL Production at Rogers. Hey, Rob, this was great to get you on the show. I think any of us that live in Canada, we'd like to see as many NHL clubs in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And listen, I think you'd have to be crazy to not kind of cross your fingers and toes a little bit and wish for an Edmonton-Toronto Stanley Cup final. So wishing you well with the rest of the NHL season, and really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me on, and let's not wait so long next time to do it again.
Amen to that. Hey, gaming news guys. Are you ready to win a bigger share of Canada's rapidly expanding gaming market? Then GBG are ready to help. As the global leaders in identity verification, GBG partner with over 60% of iGaming Ontario brands to help them onboard more players, maximize match rates, and deliver FinTrack compliance. Visit gbgplc.com today and talk to the trust experts. We welcome back to the Gaming News Canada show, BetMGM's Public Relations Manager Insights, John Ewing. Hey, John, thanks for making some time for us today.
Thanks for having me back, Steve.
John, I don't know you working in the job, if you have to be objective or if you're a sports fan. So I guess the first thing I'll ask is how are you feeling after that Four Nations face-off final?
Yeah, it was an interesting spot to be in. Of course, I was cheering for the Americans, but the book wanted Canada to win, given the action we had received. So I guess in the end, it was an emotional hedge for me. Would have preferred a U.S. victory, but it worked out for BetMGM.
Hey, John, let's just start. In terms of hockey, like how big was this event for BetMGM?
I think it surprised everybody. So we saw action right away. It had a perfect combination, right? After the NFL season ends, before March Madness begins, NBA was on its all-star break. And so then you have U.S., Canada. They're the favorites to win the tournament. It happened in a quick way, too. It wasn't stretched out over a month or anything. And, of course, you had some of the biggest names in the NHL participating, which is always helpful. And we saw a lot of action come in on these games. And the final between U.S. and Canada was the most bet hockey event in BetMGM history. So not just, you're talking bigger than the finals. You're talking bigger than any playoff game. It was really amazing.
That's crazy. And I guess obviously the Canada win was certainly good news for sports books on your side of the border. I wonder, do you have any insights into the action with BetMGM's Ontario business?
Yeah, it's exactly probably what you would expect. Overall, it was around 60% of all bets and money came in on the U.S. to win. But when you look just in Ontario, it was north of 80% was backing Canada. So you see this in every sport. The local team gets a lot of love, and that's what happened with U.S. Canada.
A bit of a win-lose for you too, right, John? You get the U.S. loses, but BetMGM brand ambassador Connor McDavid scores the winning goal for Canada. So it wasn't all bad news for you.
No, but I don't know why the U.S. left him wide open like that. That was an interesting decision.
Yeah, there'd be a few people still questioning the defensive zone play by the U.S. on that winning goal. John, you mentioned the this number of superstar players in that tournament, and I just wonder, again, I have to believe that the growth of in-play betting, a lot of that has to do with people wanting to bet on athletes, and whether that's what we saw with the NFL season with the Josh Allens and Cooper Loves and obviously Patrick Mahomes and what we see in the NBA. Are you seeing that trend in hockey as well? Because one thing the NHL's been criticized in the past for maybe not doing enough to market as superstars, and the culture of hockey itself is that hockey is a real team game, and there has been a reluctance in the past for NHL teams to really put their superstars pedestal from a marketing standpoint. But are you seeing some changes in that?
Yeah, I mean, we continue to see live betting grow as a percentage of total wagers on any event, and that is boosted by offerings. So it used to just be you could wager on who was going to win or how many goals might be scored. Now you can wager on will a player score a goal in the game? Yeah, that used to be a market that was only available before the puck would drop, and that's the same thing in the NFL or NBA. Players really do drive a lot of action. If you have a big name star in prime time, that's just going to draw more eyeballs, which in turn draws more interest from the betting public.
And John, is there, for events like this where maybe, as you said earlier, that they, a bit surprised by how popular the tournament was, and I was too. Is there a shift in strategy by a sports book? Do you start offering more products? Do you build some special plays because you see that there's a demand with your customers?
Yeah. So next time something like this happens, I'd imagine we'll have even more markets up and sooner, just in anticipation that it'll draw more interest. I know we offered a second chance goal. It's a promotion that we do, and we do this across sports, but the idea is if you bet on a player to score the first goal in the game, if they don't, but they score the second, you get your money back. So it's just a fun way to give players a chance, or more than one shot. Well, we didn't have that up at first, but then after there was such great interest, we had that available for the final between the U.S. and Canada.
It's almost like it's probably a dress rehearsal for not just sports books, but also anybody else with skin in the game around the Olympics in Italy next year. That I think what we've seen is that there was a real pent up demand for best on best international hockey. And I think those of us that follow the game closely have known that for some time now. But I think the success of a week long 4-team tournament, the Czechs weren't there, the Russians weren't there. I think it just highlights how big the Olympic hockey tournament is going to be next winter.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And I would caution, though, again, everything went right. This was just a perfect situation. If the U.S. had stumbled and lost to Finland and they didn't make the finals, the interest in the last game would have just dropped out dramatically. But you get the best players, you get the best teams, and they make it far in a tournament. That's always a recipe for success.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm not going to actually get into this, but I think we also believe that given the current political climate between the two countries, that I don't think that's anything you and I wish for, but you can't deny the fact that I'm sure that also had an impact in the heightened level of engagement around that championship game.
Yeah, I believe we have to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of Canada now, and.
Well, we could go do it the Gulf McDavid, John, and we make Canada and BetMGM would be happy.
I have no problem with that.
Hey, John, last question. At the same time the Four Nations tournament was going on, we had the NBA, another NBA All-Star weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of media and other people compared those two events, and to me, the All-Star weekend again was just another indication that All-Star weekends and All-Star games there's a real declining lack of interest in those exhibition games. And I don't know how you fix it. I think Major League Baseball, it works. Baseball is a completely different game. It's, you're not worried about, for the most part, you're not worried about someone getting injured. It's pitchers
Mm-hmm.
against batters. It's guys catching and throwing a baseball. I just wonder, with that declining engagement, is that something the sports books are seeing as well? And maybe you're not, you're offering less markets than you did in the past around All-Star games, or how's that working?
It's tricky because these leagues are trying new things, right? They see and they hear that there's disinterest. So, for example, the NBA this year had 4 teams and they played 2 small games, and then the final was it's only to 40 points instead of a full game. We did see a decline in overall bets this year, but I think a lot of that's driven by the fact that we didn't have one game with static odds for a week that you could take action on. And we then also weren't able to just have player props up the whole time. We offered props for each game, but for the final, for example, I mean, I think you could only wager on that for less than an hour before it started. So it's just not a ton of time. If you look at the events that were the same year over year, like the 3-point contest or the dunk contest, we did see an increase in wagering on those events. So again, with all-star events, a lot of that, it just depends. Like for a 3-point contest, dunk contest, who's participating. You get one of the most popular players in the league to join the dunk contest, it's going to drive action. Just like we said, doesn't matter the sport or the event, stars really do drive action. And just, I think leagues trying different things are innovative and a smart way to approach this. And if they offer new varieties, then the sports books are going to try to place wagers because that's what our customers are wanting.
Hey, John, just quickly, before we hit the record button, we were talking about, it's a busy sports calendar as always. We've got the NASCAR season has started. We've got March Madness right around the corner. The Major League Baseball season not that far away. The Masters, and then of course the NHL and NBA playoffs. Do you just the success of this Four Nations face-off tournament? Do you think that might help the BetMGM business in the States with the Stanley Cup playoffs that will start in early April?
Yeah, again, anything that can bring awareness to a sport is great. And hopefully that momentum will carry over. Of course, a lot of these sports, baseball, NBA, hockey, the seasons are long, and that's great for the diehard fans. But we see a lot of the casual bettors come back to the sport once the postseason begins.
Great stuff. John Ewing is the Public Relations Manager of Insights for BetMGM. Hey, John, thanks so much for coming back to the podcast and doing this for us.
Thanks for having me on.
We welcome back to the Gaming News Canada show for the first time in way too long, the Sportsbook Director for DraftKings, Johnny Avello. Hey, Johnny, I was just saying before I hit the record button, I think the last time we chatted, you were sitting on a fairway somewhere at the Waste Management Open, probably 2 years ago now.
Yeah, Steve, good to see you. That seems to be an annual event now for our company. First of all, we have our presence down there with our newly built sportsbook right on the course. You have to go buy it before you enter. And so I'm down there every year for at least the first couple of days and then usually off to the Super Bowl. But what a tremendous event.
Yeah, the organizers have sure hit on something special. And, you see what's happened with the PGA Tour and Live Golf. And this tournament in particular feels to me like they've kind of found that secret sauce of putting together an event that kind of sports fans can relate to and have a lot of fun with. And to the golfers' credit, they've sure gotten into the act as well.
They have. And the group down there that runs at the Thunderbirds, what a great group of individuals they are. I mean, they put on a good show. They, they have signs down there as to, it's okay to have fun, but make sure you honor the golfers, honor the play, honor the course. So people know that, they're down there to yell and root, but, don't disturb shots of players and certainly be cordial when you're around golfers making key shots.
Yeah, and it's funny, Johnny, Canadians are sort of seen as these reserved, quiet people, but, Nick Taylor won the event last year in a playoff, and the Canadians had a good run again at the tournament this year. They got, Corey Connors and Mackenzie Hughes and Svensson and Pendrith and Taylor. They seem quite at home at that tournament.
They were there. Yeah, they're comfortable down there. It's a nice course, too. I've played it. It's not a real hard course, but it's, those guys play from way back. And so it's long. But they're usually, the winner's usually somewhere between -16 and -22 or somewhere in that area. And, it's fun to be close to watch professional golfers play. For anybody who hasn't experienced, I would highly recommend it because those guys just pound the ball. And talking about the Canadians down there, Nick Taylor and some others you mentioned, I bet some of those guys, I thought they would have a good run, and they were there. It's just that it was just a little short, and there were others that kind of were able to go the distance.
Hey, Johnny, just one more question on golf. I know we got you on here to talk about hockey, but I watch a lot of golf every weekend, and everybody, it seems to be that the PGA Tour is a bit of a punching bag these days, and there's lamenting about missing the guys who've gone to live. But I got to tell you, I think there's so many talented golfers on that tour, and every weekend, even last weekend with the event in Mexico, with a lot of the big names missing from the leaderboard, there's a lot of really great athletes playing the sport on that tour right now.
Oh my God, they're so good. Scotty Scheffler's he's a phenomenon. He doesn't have the greatest swing, but if you look at it, he lifts his feet up and everything you're told not to do. But what a shot maker. And he's one of those guys right now. If he's in the field and he's anywhere within 5-6 shots on the last day, he has a chance. The rest of the guys are all good players. They just don't have the confidence that Scotty has. But they're capable of winning any time. They're amazing players. They've been playing their whole life, and I think winning is contagious. You need to learn how to win, and once you do that, then you go on and relax a little bit and win more. But some of the guys just haven't learned that yet. But tremendous field of talent out there.
Hey, I mentioned we got you on here to talk about hockey, and there's still obviously a buzz here in Canada after I think we're almost not quite a week now since the championship game and the Four Nations face-off and Canada's overtime victory over Team USA last week. But it wasn't only Canadian hockey fans that won. It was a great event from the perspective of the sports books, and we heard this week that the DraftKings, that the Canada's USA game was the most bet on hockey game of all time. I just wonder, Johnny, if you can add just some details on the kind of bets that were popular. And I'm assuming that the DraftKings did pretty well in the U.S. I'm sure a lot of your customers were betting on the U.S. to win that game.
They were, each and every game we had was a good handle, much more than any All-Star game could do. So, hats off to the NHL for putting this together. The games were competitive. The U.S. was bet every time, the U.S. played. We needed the other side in the game, and that was the case for the last game also. And they were good. I mean, the Canadian USA games were just better, good at hockey games as you'll see. And, you see players out there playing on the same team during the regular season and playoffs, and here they are on opposite sides trying to beat each other's butts. So I thought it was well done. Unfortunately, we don't get it next year because it's Olympic hockey, but other All-Stars games should take a page out of this and maybe revamp what they're doing, because it was phenomenal. It was great handle, great right. Maybe brought some new hockey viewers into the fold.
I was going to ask you about that, Johnny, that the NBA All-Star game happened at the same time, and again came under a lot of criticism. There seems to be declining interest in not just the NBA but All-Star games across the board. Is that being reflected by bettors as well? Are you seeing less action on these All-Star games?
Yeah, we are. I mean, I wouldn't say less, but it's not growing. The NBA All-Star this year wasn't any good, so that's one I can comment on that probably took a hit. But I think they need to come up with some new ideas. This was a great idea. I don't know how the NBA does it. I mean, it's hard to hockey. We know that there's players from, a lot of players from Canada, the U.S., Europe. So it's kind of a little bit easier to divide it. But maybe that's not the same idea that these others go with. Maybe there's something else that they could use. But we enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed not only we enjoyed booking the games, but just watching them because they were just so good.
Hey, Johnny, how far, you're an American. I just wonder how far back does your relationship with hockey go? Were you a hockey fan right from the get-go?
Yeah, go back to Islanders days, Billy Smith and that team winning.
Dennis Potvin.
All those championships. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So goes back quite a ways. And, hockey's changed a little bit. The guys certainly skating faster. It's like any other sport, equipment's changed. The players are probably in better shape and, certainly keep themselves physically in the most top shape you could possibly be. And so, but the game to me is still as exciting, and it's way more exciting if you go see it live than you watch it on TV.
Yeah. This Four Nations tournament, there were a lot of question marks before it started. If there's, how serious were the players going to take it, and how much interest was there going to be, and I just wonder, was that with DraftKings, whether it's kind of the same situation where you really didn't know how popular this might be your customers, and obviously that not just, I think, the Canada Team USA games, but I also think what's going on in your country right now with the Trump administration, I think, put a little bit of gas on the fire as well and fueled that rivalry. But did this tournament kind of catch DraftKings off guard a little bit too?
A little bit. I expected that it would be okay. I didn't expect it would be that good. And you're right. A little political fuel on it certainly helped the ratings and helped the wagering. So yeah, sometimes you'll ask me and say, "Were you surprised by that?" And I'll say no, because we're expecting it. But this one was a minor surprise.
What about the in-play betting, Johnny? And I mentioned this to John Ewing from BetMGM earlier, that the NHL, I think, has been a little bit guilty of the past of not really wanting to promote their stars. Hockey people really pride themselves on this being a team sport, and there's a reluctance to really market those marquee players. I think that's changing. And as I've heard sports executives talk about at gaming conferences for the past 4 years now, I think, sportsbooks are doing their part to help market the Connor McDavids and Sidney Crosby's, Nathan McKinnon's, the Tkachuk brothers, all the superstars in the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody promotes hockey more than we do on DraftKings. We have so many offerings up there, I would say more than any other sports book. You talked about in-play. In-play is, I knew many years ago that in-play would eventually be as good as pregame, and it is. And that was the case for not only the final game that we saw, about a week ago, but also our nightly viewing. We continue to put up player futures, awards. We have them all up there. We got Norris and Hart and Vezina and Nicole that are all up. And we put season specials up there. Ovechkin, will he break the record? What team will he break it against? And every other possibility for, outcomes in games. So we certainly promote hockey, and we have a hockey team that is very passionate and try to put the best product out there for our users.
Do you feel, is there an opportunity here, Johnny, where this Four Nations tournament, that there might be a bit of a carryover effect to the Stanley Cup playoffs this year? And again, maybe those casual hockey fans or newcomers of hockey might have a bit more interest in the Stanley Cup playoffs because of what they saw last week.
I'm hoping so. I mean, we ended last season, Game 7. That was one of our biggest rates ever. We go right into this year with good hockey so far. Some surprises out there. Some teams may be underperforming. Then we do this small little tournament, and it works out really well. I thought that would bring on some new users, people who don't watch hockey but just got involved in the whole country versus country thing. And so, I'm very optimistic about hockey. I think what we've done lately and some of the things that have been out there for people to view have certainly helped new viewers come on board. So, I mean, hockey. I think hockey's still alive and well right now.
Hey, Johnny, last question. I know you were at the Super Bowl in New Orleans, and you think that after the Super Bowl there might be a chance to catch your breath, but that, as we both know, the sports calendar doesn't take a break anymore. So I'm sure you've got lots going on as we get ready to turn the page on February and get into a very busy March and April.
It's a very tiny break is what it is. We had this all-star break here, a couple of all-star breaks, which is usually a little breather. Wasn't so much for hockey, but then we get into the conference tournaments in college basketball, and that's big season. To me, that's as popular as the not quite as popular, but very popular and up to par with the big tournament. And then right after that, baseball is going to start, and then we're going to get into the playoffs for both hockey and the NBA. And we've got golf all year long. We got tennis all year, for all summer long. Got horse racing all summer long. So for us, yeah, there's no time to breathe. The only thing that changed, and this is a comment that my wife and other friends of mine's wives have said, the only thing that changes is the shape of the ball.
That's what, I've never heard that one before. That's a great one. And I'm sure, John, you're seeing the same thing with sports fans that are DraftKings customers in Ontario, right? That they're the same appetite for the Four Nations and March Madness and the Masters just being around the corner, and Canadian sports fans are just as passionate as your American fans.
Yeah, Ontario does some things different than some of our country. For instance, we did take the elections up there this year, which was great. So when we had people say, I want to bet the elections, okay, you need to head up to Ontario, go up that way, Toronto. Maybe you can get a bet that way, and maybe some have gone up there. And so they've done some things a little bit differently than others down here. They're taking the Academy Awards, which we have been offering, and we have 7 states down here, and then of course up there. So that's growing. So my hat's off to up there in Toronto. Thank you guys for doing things a little bit differently, and taking a lot of the menu that we have out there.
That's Johnny Avello, the Sportsbook Director for DraftKings. Hey, Johnny, always appreciate your time, and get through March without getting sick, and hopefully finding a bit of time to get out and work on the golf game.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by GBG Plc. Thanks so much to Johnny Avello and John Ewing for joining us on today's podcast. As always, you can find us on gamingnewscanada.ca and on the various podcast platforms. And we'll see everybody again very, very soon.